at the world stage.
The rising cost of living in Nigeria continues to impact citizens from all walks of life.
The citizens of Gujarat witnessed a mega roadshow here in the city of Ahmedabad.
China is South Africa's largest trading partner for 134 years straight.
A domestic aircraft carrying 72 people on board crashed in Pokhara city in central Nepal.
165 injured have been moved, 61 people are confirmed dead, and rescue operations continue around me.
After receiving an entire season's rainfall in a span of 48 hours, Chennai city has literally been brought to its knees.
South Africa, for WION, World is One.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching WION World is One. This is World DNA, the show that gets you ahead of the rest. I'm Shivan Chandra.
And I'm Hem Khorsara, and on the show today, thousands of protesting farmers in India have put their march to Delhi on hold for 2 days. This was after the death of a 22-year-old protester on the Punjab-Haryana-Kanauji border. The sit-in protest of the farmers will, however, continue. We're, of course, tracking all the developments very closely, bringing you all the reports from Ground Zero as well. We'll get you more on this on the show.
Also on the show today, Russia has intensified its offensive on Ukraine as we approach the second anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. After taking over Avdiivka, Russia has claimed to have retaken a Ukrainian bridgehead on the banks of the Dnipro River. We'll bring you the latest on this right here on World DNA. First, let's take a look at the headlines.
Indian farmers say won't march to the capital for 2 days after one farmer dies during clashes. However, they will continue the sit-in protests.
Indian government hikes sugarcane fair price by 8% for the 2024-25 financial year amid huge tussle between the government and farmers over minimum support price.
Cash-strapped Sri Lanka exports tea worth $20 million to Iran to partially repay its $251 million oil debts.
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken tells Brazilian President Lula da Silva that the United States disagrees with controversial remarks by the Brazilian leader comparing Israel's actions in Gaza to the Holocaust.
U.S. President Joe Biden announces extending his student loan forgiveness program by cancelling the loans of an additional 150,000 Americans.
Joe Biden's brother is questioned in Congress by Republican lawmakers, leading an impeachment inquiry against the US president, who they say benefited from illicit businesses.
Now let's begin with all the updates from the farmers' protests in India. Thousands of protesting farmers in India, they have for now at least put their march to Delhi for hold for about 2 days.
Now, the decision was prompted by the death of a 22-year-old protester on the Punjab-Haryana-Kanuri border. The farmers were stopped at this particular border by the Haryana police, resulting in clashes and injuries.
Now, farmers groups, in fact, they've alleged that the protester died during the police action. Haryana police, they've denied the claim. The farmers, meanwhile, have suspended their protest march, although the sit-in protest will continue. A doctor at a Patiala hospital, where Shubkaran Singh was taken, said that he had sustained a bullet wound. A post-mortem is awaited.
Now, the Haryana police had fired tear gas shells at the advancing farmers to thwart their attempts to breach the barricades at the border. Punjab Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann confirmed the death of the protester here and assured the farmers that strict action will be taken against those responsible.
Meanwhile, the central government has called on the farmer leaders for a fifth round of talks, assuring that it is ready to discuss all matters. The 4 previous rounds of talks have not yielded any desirable results. The farmers have been protesting with a series of demands, which includes the enactment of a law which would guarantee a minimum support price for all 23 crops.
In a separate but related development, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has approved a 25 rupee per quintal hike in fair and remunerative price, or FRP, of sugarcane. The hike in FRP will be applicable for the 2024-25 season. Last year, the FRP was raised by 10 rupees per quintal, taking the price to rupees 340 or $4 per quintal.
Now, FRP, that is the minimum price to be paid by sugar mills to farmers for buying sugarcane. However, some states like Uttar Pradesh, Haryana and Punjab announced higher rates under state advised price, which supersedes the FRP. The government says the hike will benefit more than 5 crore people dependent on sugarcane farming. Now, with that being said, frustration is growing among farmers in multiple European countries as well. Farmers across the continent are protesting over a series of issues.
And of course, this is after weeks of protests. The lawmakers are struggling to settle the anger sparked by green agricultural regulations.
Beginning with Poland first, protests in Poland emerged after the country experienced a plunge in prices owing to the Ukrainian imports. Last month, its agriculture minister resigned from his position following these protests.
Polish farmers since then have continued to block highways across the country. Tuesday's protests from farmers marked an escalation from previous demonstrations in Poland, with a near total blockade of all Ukrainian border crossings and disruption at ports and on roads nationwide. Farmers also sparked anger in neighboring Ukraine after blocking the border and opening a railway carriage and emptying the grain out.
Czech farmers too have driven their tractors into downtown Prague, disrupting traffic outside the farm ministry.
And then over to Greece, where farmers drove tractors to parliament demanding tax-free fuel, debt forgiveness, as well as criticizing the substantial markup in shelf prices compared to what wholesalers pay them for their produce. Along with farmers, at least 8,000 beekeepers and livestock breeders too joined the protest.
We came here to send a message. Our action alone shows the intensity of the problem, and we believe here in front of Parliament that the government is in a position to understand what the problem is exactly. We are asking for agricultural fuel to be exempt from state taxes, and we want this immediately.
Greek Prime Minister, in a television interview on Monday, said that he could not support the additional tax breaks and concessions, but wanted to continue the discussions with the protesters.
Moving on to Spain, where hundreds of Spanish farmers drove their tractors towards Madrid city centre. Farmers say rules to protect the environment make them less competitive compared to other regions. They demanded better prices for their products.
We want fair prices. We are selling at a loss. We ask that we don't get products from outside, from third countries that don't belong to the European Economic Community and don't have the safety measure we have in Europe.
Now, during protests, a scuffle also broke out between Spanish police and farmers. Some farmers complained that police were preventing tractors from entering Madrid.
The government said that 500 tractors had been allowed entry, as that was the figure given by organizers when requesting authorization for the protest, while an additional 150 vehicles were blocked from the city.
In France, some 200 demonstrators entered the head office to denounce the practices of the dairy giant and demand better pay for farmers.
And in response, a French Prime Minister announced a new bill to strengthen the law on agriculture and food and improve salaries in the sector. He also said several million euros would be paid as emergency aid, particularly to livestock farmers.
Le premier enjeu, c'est notre souveraineté agricole.
The top priority is our agricultural sovereignty. Firstly, and in line with the commitment I made, the agricultural policy bill, which the minister will be presenting in a moment, enshrines our objective for agricultural and food sovereignty in black and white in the law and puts agriculture among the nation's fundamental interests in the same way as our national security and defense.
Demonstrations are continuing to Royal Europe as well. As it stands, the Green Deal legislation lacks the robust social dimensions which should accompany its climate focus. While trade unions unequivocally support enhanced climate action, it's crucial to acknowledge that the existing legislation, it falls short in convincing those in the affected sectors and regions.
Now, the war in Ukraine is changing gears. In recent weeks, Russia has intensified its offensive on Ukraine.
And this was ahead of Saturday's second anniversary of its invasion. Russian President Vladimir Putin remains intent on trying to defeat Ukraine 2 years after launching its full-scale invasion.
In the latest, Russia has claimed to have retaken a Ukrainian bridgehead on the banks of the Dnipro River. The Kremlin says it has seized the village of Krinky as its forces step up their offensive.
Now, the settlement on the left bank of Dnipro opposite Kherson was captured by Ukrainian Marines in October. Since then, it has been under heavy bombardment almost ever since.
Although Ukraine has denied the claims made by Russia, Kiev says its troops are still holding their position under fierce attacks. Moscow's push on Krinky came amid a series of coordinated Russian assaults along the front line in eastern and southern Ukraine, following the capture of the town of Avdiivka.
Attacks have also intensified around Robotyne as Moscow attempts to stretch and probe Ukrainian forces as they run low on ammunition.
Amidst the recent attacks, according to a survey, only 10% of Europeans believe Ukraine can defeat Russia on the battlefield, while 20% say Russia will win the war. And some 37% of Europeans think the conflict will end in a stalemate.
The European Council on Foreign Relations poll comes as Ukraine acknowledges facing difficulties on the front line. Furthermore, Kyiv has doubts over the Western backing as it continues to fight the Russian forces.
The United States has said that the World Court should not order the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Palestinian territories.
Now, the International Court of Justice is mulling a 2022 request, and this was to issue a non-binding opinion on the legal consequences of the Israeli occupation.
A few days ago at the Munich Security Conference, Secretary Blinken emphasized that it is more urgent than ever to proceed to a Palestinian state, one that also ensures the security of Israel and makes the necessary commitments to do so. In light of these considerations, the court should not find that Israel is legally obligated to immediately and unconditionally withdraw from occupied territory.
Also at the hearing, Russia called for Israel to end its occupation of the Palestinian territories. Amid dwindling ties with Washington, Moscow said Israel must stop all settlement activities and abide by UNSC resolutions aimed at achieving a two-state solution. Israel is not taking part in the hearing, saying that the court's involvement could hinder a negotiated settlement.
Amid growing international calls for efforts to reach a two-state solution, Israel's parliament has voted to back Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's declaration opposing the unilateral creation of the Palestinian state. Israel also says that any permanent accord with Palestinians would be reached through direct negotiations between the two sides and not by international diktats.
Meanwhile, the international community, including the United Nations, has been accused of failing to stop mounting wars and conflicts that are killing innocent people. As it hosts foreign ministers from the G20 nations, Brazil has slammed the Security Council for its unacceptable paralysis in relation to ongoing conflicts.
This comes after Brazilian President Lula da Silva compared Israel's war on Gaza to Hitler's treatment of the Jews. The comments led to an ongoing diplomatic spat between Brazil and Israel. And at the G20 meeting, U.S. Secretary of State has now asserted that the United States does not agree with the Brazilian leader's remarks. And staying on with news from Israel and Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed an absolute victory in Gaza.
He has repeatedly said Israel will continue its offensive in the Gaza Strip until the Hamas militant group leaves the Strip. However, a latest poll now shows majority of Israelis believe an absolute victory is not possible in Gaza.
Now, according to a poll by Israel Democracy Institute think tank, around 55.3% of the respondents said there is fairly low or in fact very low likelihood of such an outcome. However, the same poll also opposed the establishment of an independent and demilitarized Palestinian state.
Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, Israeli protesters rallied for the release of the hostages, wearing masks bearing the photos of the hostages. Protesters held demonstrations at various public places across the city. Amid this, Israeli finance minister has made a very sharp statement that may irk the kins of the hostages in Israel even more. In a radio interview, Bezalel Smotrich said bringing back the hostages abducted by Hamas is not the top priority. As he says, the destruction of Hamas is more important at the moment.
Of course, the comments were enough to spark outrage. Benny Gantz, a member of the Israel War Cabinet, said no opportunity to bring the hostages back home will be missed. Opposition leader Yair Lapid describes Smotrich's comments as a moral disgrace and an attack on the families of the hostages.
After his comments attracted enough criticism, Smotrich clarified his statement. As he said, only by destroying Hamas, Israel can bring the hostages back home. Now, over to the US. US President Joe Biden's brother has testified as part of House Republicans' sweeping impeachment inquiry into the president, which has largely focused on deals cut by his brother and son, Hunter Biden.
Now, according to a copy of the opening statement, Biden's youngest brother said, and I'm quoting here, "I have had a 50-year career in a variety of business ventures. Joe Biden has never had any involvement or any direct or indirect financial interests in those activities. None."
The session was held after the revelation that a former FBI informant charged with making up a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme involving the Bidens and a Ukrainian energy company had contacts with officials associated with Russian intelligence. Now, Republicans have also focused on the president's son, Hunter Biden, saying that he used his father's name while he was vice president under Barack Obama to enrich himself with foreign business deals in Ukraine and China.
The investigation is dragged on into the 2024 election year, despite it failing to produce any clear evidence of wrongdoing by the president. Democrats have accused the Republicans of trying to whip up the impeachment process as a political play ahead of the November elections.
Criticism over the lack of evidence against the president has grown even among Republicans. Many GOP lawmakers say they have yet to see evidence of the high crimes and misdemeanors required for impeachment. House Republicans are facing the prospect that they might not be able to muster their slim majority for an eventual impeachment vote.
For more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has the latest inputs on this. Listen to this.
GOP lawmakers have heard testimony from a number of the first son's former business associates, including Tony Bobulinski, who testified that Joe Biden is indeed involved in the family's business ventures. He also testified that he personally met with Joe Biden. Another former business associate of Hunter Biden, Rob Walker, testified that Joe Biden met with the chairman of the Chinese energy firm CEFC and that his brother and son were doing business at that time with that company. James Biden confirmed that he was working with CEFC along with his nephew Hunter Biden and business associate Walker, Bobulinski, and another individual, saying that it was a straightforward venture. Now, more interviews, including from Hunter Biden, are expected in the next 2 weeks, but impeachment efforts were somewhat stalled after a key source of information named Alexander Smirnov was charged last week with making up claims and having close ties with Russia.
Susan also tells us if this will impact Biden's presidential campaign and voter sentiment. Listen to this.
The White House has repeatedly pushed back on claims of wrongdoing by President Joe Biden, citing the lack of evidence provided by Republicans to support allegations against the Biden family. And unless the GOP comes up with concrete evidence of high crimes and misdemeanor, it's unlikely that this issue will have an impact on President Biden's campaign and also voter sentiment.
President Joe Biden said that his administration is cancelling $1.2 billion worth of student loans.
And this is for nearly 150,000 people who are eligible under this new program. Now, under the new program, borrowers who have been repaying their student loans for 10 years and who've borrowed about $12,000 or less will see their remaining debt cancelled.
I'm happy to have been able to forgive these loans because when we realize and relieve Americans of their student debt, they're free to chase their dreams. While a college degree is still a ticket to a better life, that ticket is too expensive. And too many Americans are still saddled with unsustainable debt in exchange for a college degree.
With this, the administration has now cancelled some $138 billion in student loan for nearly 3.9 million people through executive actions. Initially, the 81-year-old Democrat had bigger ambitions, planning to cancel several $100 billion of debt for middle-class borrowers.
But the plan was struck down by the Supreme Court, leaving the Biden administration to approve a handful of more modest measures as a workaround. Biden's campaign, it's been touting, is largely robust economic and social gains to young Americans. But so far, young voters have little enthusiasm for Biden's return to the White House.
An opinion poll published by Quinnipiac University has Biden and Trump running neck and neck with young Americans. While 47% of voters aged 18 to 34 plan to vote for Biden, 45% are planning to vote for Trump.
At the same time, when asked about their views on the two presidential hopefuls, only 30% in that group had a favorable opinion of Biden compared to 39% of Trump. Now, speaking of debt, let's talk about Sri Lanka, which has figured out a unique way to repay its debts. And in a deal agreed on in December 2021, the country chose to export tea worth $20 million to Iran to partially repay its debt.
Well, of course, the debt that it stands with is $251 million, and these are oil debts. Even though the tea for oil deal was agreed over 3 years ago, its exports were delayed by Colombo's economic crisis that forced then-President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down in July 2022. Colombo says Tehran's foreign minister had expressed satisfaction at the deal.
Now, this barter deal allows sanctions hit Iran to avoid using hard currency to pay for imports of popular tea, and it also allows Sri Lanka to pay with tea as the country was short on foreign currency. And the island defaulted on its $46 billion foreign debt in April 2022 and then secured a $2.9 billion IMF bailout early last year.
Ceylon tea, known by the island's colonial-era name, made up nearly half of Iran's consumption in 2016. However, the proportion has declined in recent years.
And all right, with that, it's time now for a short break.
Don't go anywhere. This is World DNA. Of course, we'll be back after the break. When we get back, Taiwanese fishermen in sensitive waters near the Chinese coast say they are worried about rising tensions. This is, of course, after 2 Chinese nationals died during an altercation with Taiwan's Coast Guard.
Also on the other side, driven by rising interest rates and government spending, global debt pile hits $313 trillion. Higher borrowing costs from businesses to countries are expected to follow. That could have serious consequences as well. We'll explore this on the other side. Do stay tuned.
India's Global Voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
Two Indian businessmen meet almost entirely by chance. They put together the bones of a travel proposition. 23 years in, it's really interesting about Make My Trip is that it spawned hundreds of Rajesh McGowan.
I think the game-changing moment for me was also meeting Deep. Make My Trip was actually his idea. The market dynamics changed. A lot of capital started to come to India. I think at the core of it's about satisfaction and the fulfillment of achieving something. That gives us a lot more kick at Make My Trip. I believed in application. I don't think you can ever be in a situation where you know it all.
African Union leaders condemn Israel's offensive in Gaza as the most flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. The summit accuses Israel of exterminating Gaza's inhabitants and tells it to immediately end operations. Two-pronged protests take place in Democratic Republic of Congo, capital of Kinshasa. While on the one hand, protesters accuse the West of supporting the M23 rebels in the conflict-hit East, the women are fed up with the fighting in Goma. And a sculptor in Gabon transforms salvaged paper into fine art. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION World is One.
We are here on ground zero, Shambu border. If I can ask my cameraman to just pan out. A lot of barricading has been done. But of course, the farmers here are saying that this is a do or die situation for them. The MSP and its legal guarantee being a key sticking point between both sides. The farmers are still present over here. There is no movement per se. They're headed in a good and a positive direction. Talks seem to be the only way forward between the two parties. I'm Dharamjot Kaur, bringing you the latest developments from farmers' agitation in India.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Welcome back to World DNA. Thank you so much for staying with us. Of course, so far on the show, we've gotten you all the latest from the farmers' protests, where they've decided now to halt their march to the capital for at least 2 days. And this is after the death of one of the protesters on the Punjab-Haryana border.
Of course, we are tracking that continuously as we get developments from the ground, and we're also looking at all the updates coming in from around the world regarding the ongoing wars. We brought you all of that in the first half hour of the show. As of now, let's get started with all the other headlines we're tracking for you. This is World DNA.
Indian farmers say won't march to the capital for 2 days after one farmer dies during clashes. However, they will continue the sit-in protests.
Indian government hikes sugarcane fair price by 8% for the 2024-25 financial year amid huge tussle between the government and farmers over minimum support prices.
Cash-strapped Sri Lanka exports tea worth $20 million to Iran to partially repay its $251 million oil debt.
US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken tells Brazilian President Lula da Silva that the United States disagrees with controversial remarks by the Brazilian leader comparing Israel's actions in Gaza to the Holocaust.
US President Joe Biden announces extending his student loan forgiveness program by cancelling the loans of an additional 150,000 Americans.
Joe Biden's brother is questioned in Congress by Republican lawmakers leading an impeachment inquiry against the US president, who they say benefited from illicit businesses.
Now, amid the spiraling Beijing-Taipei friction, rising tensions are now worrying Taiwanese fishermen in dangerous waters near the Chinese coast.
This comes after Taiwan drove away a Chinese Coast Guard boat that entered waters near its frontline islands. Here's a report. Take a look.
Taiwanese fishermen are exercising caution when they go out to work on the sensitive waters around the frontline islands near the Chinese coast. They say they are worried about rising tensions after 2 Chinese nationals died during a chase with Taiwan's Coast Guard. They died when Taiwan's Coast Guard tried to expel their boat, which then overturned. Their vessel had gotten close to an islet that is part of the Kinmen Islands, which has been governed from Taipei since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. A furious China, which claims Taiwan as part of its own territory, responded by launching its own Coast Guard patrols and on Monday boarded a Taiwanese tourist boat operating off Kinmen. Huang Zhonfang, secretary of the Kinmen Fishermen's Association, said members were not yet allowing the situation to deter them from working on the water.
After this incident, fishermen will still be psychologically affected to an extent when they go out to sea. But according to our statistics in the past few days, the number of boats heading out to sea has in fact been normal. If the fishery administration fleet on the mainland comes out, this behaviour will cause some pressure on our fishermen while working at sea. They will be afraid because of this. After this incident, the fear of this matter extends to the work of our ordinary fishing boats, which will cause them a lot of stress.
Kinmen is home to around 100,000 people. It also hosts a large Taiwanese military garrison, just a short boat ride from the Chinese cities of Xiamen and Quanzhou. Taiwan's Coast Guard patrols its waters, and several of Kinmen's surrounding islets are heavily fortified and mostly off-limits to civilians, including Beiding, the islet where the Chinese boat was overturned. China last week said it recognises no banned or restricted waters for fishermen around Kinmen. Kinmen was the scene of sometimes intense fighting between Taiwanese and Chinese forces during the height of the Cold War, but is today a popular holiday destination, with many tourists drawn to its old bunkers and bullet-pocked wartime sites.
A latest COVID-19 study is providing answers to one of the questions often repeated since the vaccines were introduced. How have the vaccines been affecting our health?
Now, the largest vaccine study to date, it has identified some risks which are associated with them. And our next report brings you all the details. Take a look.
New Zealand's Global Vaccine Data Network analysed data from 99 million people who received COVID-19 vaccines across 8 countries. Their findings show the vaccines are responsible for a slight increase in neurological, blood and heart-related disorders. The research says 3 doses of Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna's mRNA vaccines could trigger myocarditis, a rare condition of heart inflammation. A 3rd dose of AstraZeneca vaccine increased the risk of another heart condition, pericarditis, 6.9-fold. The 1st and 4th dose of Moderna increased the risk 1.7-fold and 2.6-fold respectively. Those who took the AstraZeneca shots had a greater risk of developing a rare neurological disorder, Guillain-Barré syndrome. They also had a 3.2 times increased risk of getting blood clots. The Moderna vaccine increased the risk 3.8 times of the neurological disorder. Acute disseminated encephalomyelitis for AstraZeneca's vaccine users, there was a 2.2-fold increased risk of the disorder. The study also warned of several other disorders that need further investigation. However, it emphasized that the risk of developing any of the mentioned conditions are very small. The research notes that out of 13 billion doses administered, there have been only 2,000 such cases. The study also highlights that the benefits of the vaccines far outweigh the risks. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Moving on now to all the news from the world of business. As Germany grapples with economic challenges, Economy Minister has shed light on the situation.
And is offered a glimpse of hope for the future. In the midst of difficulties, Habeck highlights the potential for improvement, citing an anticipated rise in private consumption throughout the year. Listen into what he had to say.
The situation is challenging, extremely challenging. We must do more. We must address reforms and booster reforms in order to strengthen and maintain Germany's competitiveness in a totally different global environment. But we should do so with an approach of mutual support and concrete steps, just like we mastered other challenges over the past 2 years. I am full of hope that this economic report, the foundation of future debates, can make a contribution. Looking ahead, however, we see clear signs that the trend can improve again. That's mainly due to last year's high wages agreements and the available income, which has now significantly risen. Let me show you this chart. It's quite interesting. You can ask, how is Germany doing? And you can see it's pretty well here. The blue area is the available income, the increase in available income, in other words, the boost. The red line shows the inflation rates.
Now, the government's annual economic report forecasts modest growth for Germany, projecting a 1% increase in next year compared to 0.2% this year.
However, concerns loom over inflation, with expectations of a rise to 2.8% this year before easing to 2% in 2025. Negotiations for the Mercosur trade deal with South America face hurdles as France expresses reservations due to concerns over food imports not meeting EU standards. Despite challenges, efforts continue to pave the way forward, with discussions ongoing to address concerns and seek mutually beneficial agreements.
Meanwhile, German office spaces are facing the brunt of the economic slowdown. Germany's market for office buildings has suffered its sharpest drop in 2 decades. Higher financing costs and sluggish return to office trends have soured investor appetite. Prices slumped by over 10% in 2023. That's the most since records began in 2003. The trouble in the commercial real estate market also threatening to plunge some banks into crisis. Concerns about exposure to the sector are rising, and German lenders in particular are under increasing investor scrutiny.
The global debt pile has hit $313 trillion, driven by rising interest rates and government spending.
Now, this means higher borrowing costs for everyone, from businesses to countries, and could have serious consequences, of course.
In 2023 alone, borrowers accumulated an additional $15 trillion, exacerbating concerns over the sustainability of borrowing practices. Government debts have surged to $89.9 trillion, marking a significant increase from pre-pandemic levels. The consequences of this rising debt are already being felt, of course. Higher borrowing costs are squeezing budgets and making it harder for governments to invest in essential services. So for businesses, it can lead to slower growth and even defaults.
The United States finds itself at a historic juncture as its national debt peaks at a record $34 trillion. While previously insulated by the dollar's reserve currency status, mounting borrowing costs are now causing unease. As interest rates rise, the strain on governments, particularly in Western Europe and North America, becomes increasingly palpable, with debt interest payments set to rise significantly in the coming years.
China's economic landscape is also fraught with challenges as its government debt rises by the equivalent of 1/4 of GDP since the onset of the pandemic. Despite its middle-income status, China's borrowing levels approach those of affluent nations, raising concerns about economic stability.
Fitch ratings highlight China's slowing growth, ongoing property sector issues, and high leverage of areas of particular scrutiny, signaling potential economic headwinds ahead.
Despite the worrying debt trends, there are some signs of resilience. The global economy has shown surprising strength in the face of rising interest rates and debt levels. However, this resilience may not last. The key moving forward will be for governments and businesses to strike a delicate balance, managing debt levels while investing in growth and ensuring economic stability.
All right, now on to all the updates from the world of technology. Here are all the big developments. A new class action lawsuit alleges that Google has knowingly sold overheating Pixel 6 Pro units. The lawsuit filed by Jennifer Hyatt says that she went through multiple replacement units but faced the same overheating issues.
The lawsuit claims Google violated multiple California laws, including the false advertising law. Google's support website acknowledges common use cases like video calling and video recording that could cause overheating. The lawsuit is intended for California's Pixel 6 Pro buyers, which seeks recalls and refunds from the tech giant. Google has faced previous class action lawsuits over handset issues. Despite some improvements, Pixel phones still face challenges with overheating and connectivity.
And this story is about ChatGPT. Many ChatGPT users are worried about the popular generative AI platform, saying that it might be going crazy. Now, if you're wondering why, well, it seems that ChatGPT is generating unexpected, weird and in fact scary and nonsensical responses. Many users have put up screenshots of their chats with the AI tool on X and Reddit, where it can be seen replying to prompts with what looks like gibberish. Most of these screenshots showed ChatGPT replying in a mix of multiple languages, such as using a random mix of English, Spanish words as well. And in some cases, although the reply is in English, the sentence has been framed in such a manner that it makes absolutely no sense.
In one of the cases, a user asked ChatGPT to name the biggest city on earth, whose name starts with the letter A, to which the chatbot replied Tokyo in Japan. Now, OpenAI has acknowledged the error and has announced that it is currently investigating the reason behind ChatGPT's erratic behavior.
And in a recent report from the American Lung Association, a wholesale shift to electric vehicles could be significantly improving children's health globally. According to the report, transitioning to EV-only sales by 2035 could lead to 2.7 million fewer asthma attacks among children.
And 147,000 fewer cases of acute bronchitis here. Combustion engine vehicles contribute significantly to climate change, accounting for over a quarter of global emissions. Despite challenges such as high prices and concerns about charging infrastructure, EV sales have been steadily increasing. However, transitioning the entire vehicle fleet to EVs by 2050 presents a significant challenge, especially considering the average age of vehicles on the road today. And it's over to sports. 2004 champions FC Porto have stunned Arsenal 1-0 in the first leg of their Champions League last 16 clash.
Now, Brazilian winger Wenderson Galeno snatched the win by curling a wonderful finish with the last kick of the game. In their first knockout match in Europe's premier competition